Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, the slides are not done yet because I have to finish the whole batch of stuff first and then I'll do that, okay? So last time we talked about passives and we discovered what the phenomenon of passives is. Can you just tell me what a passive sentence is with respect to an active sentence? What's the definition that we use? No one? Exactly. Okay, where the patient becomes the subject, the syntactic subject. So we have noticed the following, namely that the notion of subject is an ambiguous notion. You can call the subject something that is the agent, so you have a semantic definition of subject, or you can call the subject the element that agrees with the inflected verb, and that's a syntactic notion of subject. There is also a pragmatic notion of subject, that's what a sentence is about, right? But here we said we call subject only the element that agrees with the verb. So we use a syntactic notion of subject, precisely because of passives. Why? Well, because in passive clauses, the syntactic subject of the clause is not the agent, it's the patient. And the agent is generally expressed through a by phrase, through a prepositional phrase introduced by in English, by da in Italian. It's in other languages, it's some sort of element, but in any case, it's a preposition. And we notice that there is a problem because, as we noticed, the type of movement that we get in syntax must obey some restrictions. We notice the restrictions that movement must obey. First restriction, you move upwards. Second restriction, you move to a position of the same type. So if you have a head, you move to a head position. If you have a complex element, you move to a specifier position. Okay? This is called structure preserving principle. The third restriction on movement is that movement does not happen just by chance. Movement is always motivated by something. We talked about WH movement, that's the most typical case of movement, and we said, WH movement is not universal, but it's motivated by the fact that you have to type the sentence as a question. There are other ways to type the sentence as a question. For instance, Chinese uses sentential particles, it doesn't use this WH movement. But WH movement is motivated by this. Okay, we have noticed that even, in the Romance languages there are varieties that don't have WH movement at all, right? But they have something else. So, once we have seen that movement must be motivated, then the question becomes, how does the mechanism of movement work in practice? And we notice the following, namely that, or maybe I can just, let me see if I can stop. So maybe you can see the blackboard, the whiteboard better now, okay? So we notice that the mechanism of movement has always the same type of procedure, okay? And we notice that for the subject movements, I'm now using the most possible type of structure that you can ever have. As you notice, I'm putting all the labels. Please do the same when you're doing syntactic structures, because otherwise I get a set of branches with any label and you don't understand really what's going on. Okay, we said, suppose that tense has the necessity to agree with the verb. This is not true in all the languages of the world, but it's true fairly well in the Romance languages. it's true in the Germanic languages, even in English, where you just have s on the third person singular. Okay? So suppose that you have a T0 position that has features that need to be valued, they need to be filled. Because tense says, I have a subject, but I don't know person and number of the subject. So what does it do? So tense sends a probe, as we said last time, probe downstairs in its C command domain. And I've been given to understand that the custom transformer may, C command view. C command is rather easy from it has a very complex definition, but it's rather easy. So it is something like go one step up to your mother node and your sister node, and everything that is included in your sister node is your C command domain. It's called constituent command. Okay, so it has a very complex definition, but if you look at it from the structure point of view, it's easy to determine. Just look one up and all the rest down is your C command domain. Okay? So it looks down into the C command domain and looks for an element that has the features that it lacks. Okay? So suppose tense requires a person and number feature. It will look down in order to find an element that has person and number features that you can call. Ciao, ho un problema con lo schermo. Perché mi funziona questo, ma non vedo niente qua. È completamente scuso. Stavo cercando io, ma non trovavo
Cerco di non spegnerli, però qualcuno mi ferma.
Grazie.
Figurati.
Okay, so now I can see you very well. So, just look down. What do you find? You find the first element that you find in the stack of the P. In the stack of the P, there is a nominal constituent, so the abbreviation of the nominal constituent for the moment is DP, so determinant trace. So it's a DP. This DP has person and number features. So the probe stops here, finds the person and number features, copies them onto T, and by doing this, moves up the DP to the specifier of T. And this is the reason why English has a preverbal subject, always, even before the auxiliary. So take a sentence like, John has come home. Has is sitting here. Actually, it doesn't know which features it must have. Goes, looks down, sends the probe, finds the goal. So the DP is the goal. And the goal is defined as the first element in the C command domain that has the right properties. So if we will see later on that between T and DP there are other projections. But if there are other projections, then they contain adverbs. Adverbs don't have person and number feature. So even if they are in between, they are not relevant. Why? Because they are not the right type of element you're looking for. Suppose you like a blonde man with green eyes, you're going to look for a blonde man with green eyes, those with dark eyes or with blue eyes. But they're not interesting, so you just ignore them, okay? So, it finds is matched, the right match, and then it copies the features, and in a language like English, copying the feature also means that you have to move the DP up to the specifier of T, so they are in a specifier head relation, where the DP is the specifier of the same projection where the verb is sitting, okay, specifier head, okay, spec head. It's called spec head relation. So when an element is in the same specifier with the head, they are very close to each other, so they can pass the features, and they're very happy. Now, what happens with the passive? With the passive, you have to grant, the problem that we discussed is that you have to grant the fact that the T goes down up to here. You remember that we talked about the problem of dative and accusatives, and we said that there are two possibilities. The dative is sitting here, the accusative is sitting here, or the accusative is sitting here, and the dative is sitting here. So you can choose both, right? Depending on the structure that you have. Suppose that the subject, the object, and the patient is sitting here, which is the position where it gets its thematic role. Okay, so the patient is sitting here, and it is realized by a DP, by a noun, just like the subject. When the subject is in between, you're never going to be able to look this down and bring this up, because the probe will always stop here, because this is in between. It's the same phenomenon that you found in the first, in our first lesson. All the people tend to sit on the sides, and all the others have to come in, and they cannot sit. Why? Because there is somebody sitting in between, so they have to stand up, and people have to go. So how does the subject, how does the agent stands up and goes away in order for the patient to be found as the real goal? We said there are two possibilities. One possibility is called smuggling. So you know what, when you take something with you that you're not allowed to take, so suppose you're taking a bottle of wine on the airplane, you're not supposed to bring it with you in your hand luggage, because that's prohibited, so that's smuggling, okay? So you're smuggling something. Smuggling has been proposed recently. I even quoted, I think, a book by Chris Collins and Adriana Belletti from 2020, where there is a series of papers on smuggling, including one that I wrote. But what is interesting, don't read mine because it's too complicated for you, but just read the introduction in case you need it, okay? So what happens is that you take the whole BP and you put it here to a position that is in between T and small BP. So you grant that on the one hand, what you're moving is a bigger chunk. So you're never moving the patient alone, crossing the subject. You're just moving a bigger thing. But then when T sends its probe downstairs, the first thing that it sees is not the agent anymore, it's a patient. Because we get something like this. And here you have your tense that is looking for its properties. Then you have another functional projection in between. And then you have the BP. Okay? So, and here there is the patient. So what you do is you take all this, you move it up to the specifier of F, which is a functional projection that we have not identified yet. And we're going to talk more about this when we do adverbs. So the structure in between T and VP when we talk about adverbs. And here, so what you have is the VP. Okay? So suppose that your T sends down the probe. The first thing it finds is the FP, right? Because this is higher. It looks into the specifier and says, here you are, I found you. And then it copies this feature, moves this out to this position. Okay? Is it clear? So, through smuggling, what you are bypassing the problem that, this thing is sitting in between. Okay? So in a sense, if you take the metaphor about the seats, you are sitting in the last row, there is somebody just on the edge. So you're not sitting in the last row any longer, you're going one row before that. Okay? Is it clear what's going on? So that's one possible solution. What is the other possible solution? Well, the other possible solution is that you don't have anything else than usual. What you see is that instead of having a DP here, what I have here is a prepositional phrase. Okay? So suppose that you have a prepositional phrase here, which is, by. the T sends down its probe, it finds the BP, right? And then you could say, well, it stops here because somehow the preposition masks the fact that there is a DP below, okay? And then it's not visible any longer. But if it's a BP, then the first possible DP is this one, and then you can move. Okay, is it clear? These are two different solutions to the same problem, right? One solution, the one with the biphrase, needs an assumption. The assumption is the following, that when you find a preposition, you stop the probe. So prepositions stop the probe, okay? That's an additional assumption. What is the assumption that you need here? Well, here you need more than one. First of all, you need the existence of an FP, and then you need to say that this VP is a good target, so it's a good goal for this FP, so that you can move it. So somehow you need to motivate the existence of FP, and you need to motivate the existence of the movement of the V to FP. Is it clear? So you make two assumptions. Now, choosing between this possibility, the possibility of the biphrase, and this possibility, the possibility of smuggling, depends on the following. Do you have additional empirical evidence that prepositions always stop probes, or do you have additional evidence that there is an active here? You see, it's an empirical problem, right? So what I'm not going to pursue this line of thought. All I wanted to tell you is that when you have a problem, a syntactic problem, there is always more than one way to solve it, right? But there is also, you know, a cost that comes with each analysis, and then the cost is smaller if you can prove that that assumption is justified from an independent point of view by other things, okay? So your analysis will never be concentrated on one phenomenon only. It has to look at different phenomena in order to be strong enough. There is one chair here if you want to sit. Okay? Are there any other? There is no space, right? So all the seats are taken. No, there is not. You see, the same effect that we were looking at. Somebody is stopping people from getting in. An intervener. So our guy with the glasses is the intervener for the moment. You know, he's moved so that there is no intervener any longer. It's the same phenomenon. Okay, so is it clear? So this was our story about the passive. Later on, when we do adverbs, we are going to show that actually there is good evidence that there are functional projections in between T and the VP. So this is well justified. Okay? I'm not going to pursue this line of thought. But I'm going to show you that at least in one case, we have empirical evidence that there is something like this. Okay? Great. And then we moved to another phenomenon, namely unaccusativity. The problem now is that unaccusatives are not syntactically marked in English, in a language like English. So all I can give you are examples from other languages about unaccusatives. Okay? What is the phenomenon of unaccusativity? Well, the phenomenon of unaccusativity, as we said last time, I have to share the screen first. Okay, we said that there are some other structures that resemble passives, and we have noted last time that the passive takes the auxiliary be in English and in many other languages. And there are other verbs that can take the auxiliary be, at least in some of the languages. So I mentioned French, I mentioned German, and I mentioned Italian. Spanish and English don't have this phenomenon, for instance. Right? Okay, what is the phenomenon? Well, there are some verbs that instead of taking the auxiliary have, take the auxiliary be. why do they look like passives? That's a problem. First of all, we have to show that they look like passives. So, there are some tests that are called unaccusativity tests that show you that actually these verbs function as if they were passives, not only in terms of the selection of the auxiliary, but in terms of other possible tests. I think that you did this with Nicola at the tutor hours. No? Not yet? Okay, so let's do it first together then. So we have first made a list of the possible classes that can take the auxiliary be. These classes are change of state verbs like die or be born, stated verbs like live, stay, or psychological verbs like the verb to like, yeah. And here is a list of auxiliary. Oh, just a minute. I have forgotten this. So this is a list that has been taken from a paper by Antonella Sorace from the University of Edinburgh. I'm frantically looking for my pointer. I'll find it. No. Ah, I need my pointer. I hope I didn't leave it in the other room. Well, anyway, I will have to go and grab it because it's not here. Well, let's make a bit of gymnastics then. Okay, so first class, change of location. So verbs like go, come, arrive, and all the general verbs of location, of change of location, they can take the auxiliary be. There is a chair here if you want. Nobody wants a chair. It doesn't bite. Then change of state, as I said, die, to be born, or staying in a pre-existent state, like remain, stay, live, or as I said, existence of state and uncontrolled processes. Okay? So process that is not controlled by the person who should be the agent. Okay? Once again, when you come into the classroom and sit down, please squeeze in, because you know this is a room that is more or less okay for the course. So just squeeze in, because otherwise people will have to jump over chairs and do strange things because there are interveners. Okay. So then we have controlled processes and uncontrolled, and then controlled processes that are non-motional. These two always select have. And languages cut at different points whether they can select be or have. So if a language has the phenomenon in which you can have two auxiliaries, change of location verbs are the first class of verbs that takes be. Okay? And then you go down to state continuation, pre-existence of state, and then to a control processes. Okay? So Italian, for instance, cuts here. So a verb like, piacere, takes be. German cuts here, because existence of state verbs take be, but the corresponding form of like, gefallen, takes have in German. You see? So the hierarchy of verbs is the same, but the cutting point of the different languages is different. So it seems that the hierarchy is universal, and then you can squeeze or extend the two auxiliaries as you prefer. So there are even languages that only have the auxiliary be for everything. And English is the example of a language that has the auxiliary have for everything, right? Because you say, I have gone. Okay? If you read novels from the 19th century, you know, those girls' novels like Jane Eyre and all this sort of love novels, they still have the phenomenon of unaccusativity in English. They display it, so English lost it, had it and lost it. It's fine. Okay? French, German, and Italian are still a bit more conservative in this respect. And they are, as I said, they are cutting this hierarchy at different points. Okay? But this is a universal hierarchy. So the universal hierarchy, if you look at all these verbs, there is something that they have in common. So there is one property that is, I think, what is bearing. And it's the degree of agentivity of the verb. You know, because these are the verbs that are most agentive. So I do something onto something else. You know, I eat an apple. The apple has disappeared after I eat it. Or I read the book has not disappeared after I read it, hopefully, if I didn't burn it or something. But, you know, it's something that I'm doing as an agent onto something else. Okay? But if you think of a motion verb, the only thing you do when you move is you change your location. You're not, how could I say, exercising an action onto the rest of the world. You're exercising an action onto yourself. Okay, so arrive, go, etc. is something that is not a real agent because I'm not modifying anything else in the world outside myself. Okay, just, you know, I am the one. Verbs like die are also verbs that don't imply a degree of agentivity. Unless you commit suicide, and there is another verb for that, to die is an involuntary action. Actually, I don't think that there are a lot of people who want to die. Right? This is something that happens to you. You see? So it's not an agentive verb. To be born, it has kept to be in English even, nascere, is also non-agentive. You know, we never asked infants whether they wanted to be born. Probably they didn't. You know, they were perfectly happy at home in their mother's womb, right? So, you see what I mean? So it's this is the type of verb that has the least degree of agentivity, and this is the type of verb that has the biggest degree of agentivity. Okay? And again, you know, this somehow reminds us of passives. Why? Because in the case of passives, what you do is you sort of demote the agent and take the patient and make it the subject. So all these verbs on top of the hierarchy are verbs in which you take an element that is not really the agent and you turn it into the subject of the clause. And in this sense, they are like passives. Is it clear? I think that, how many of you had an accusativity with Emanuele Sanfelici? Raise your hands. It's not many. It's not many. Okay, so for all the others, an accusativity is new. You don't know, you didn't know what it was. Okay, so it's simply, by the way, if some of you is going to become an Italian professor, an Italian teacher, or a teacher of French, or a teacher of German, or anything, you know, for English mother tongue speakers, you will see how much native English speakers sweat about understanding when do I have to put be and when do I have to put have, because they don't have the distinction, right? And when you don't have a distinction that is found in a foreign language, then it's always a problem to learning. While, you know, German speakers don't even have a problem. They have a couple of problems with reflexives or, you know, with a couple of verbs like, but for the rest they have the phenomenon. French speakers have the phenomenon. It's Spanish speakers who have the problem because they don't have the phenomenon, okay? So pay attention that this is something that might be interesting for you to know also as future teachers of any language. Because there are languages that have the phenomenon, languages that just cover everything with have, or cover everything with be. They don't make any distinction, and then there is a problem if you don't make a distinction. So is it clear why accusatives are packed together with passives? Because they have subjects that are not really the agent, just like a passive. And that's exactly what the auxiliary be signals. It signals, look, I am not a real agent. And this is also the reason why intransitive verbs are split into two classes. There are verbs, intransitive verbs that have real agentive subjects that take half, like work. Generally, you work voluntarily, and when you work, you generally also change the rest of the world, right? So, you know, you give something, I don't know, if you are a shopkeeper, you sell stuff. If you are a professor, you try to influence the mind of your students by providing them with new notions. And when you are, I don't know, a gardener, you just, you know, dig and plant and make things grow, etc. So you change the rest of the world. Okay, so you're a real agent. Notice that the definition that we have now of agent is a much more refined one. Right? So the definition that we are using here in order to account for an accusativity is that the agent is that person or thing that changes the outer world, not the thing itself. Okay? And it can also be an inanimate. So if I say a stone broke the window, you know, the stone has an effect on the window. Now the window is broken, not the stone. You see? So the stone has changed something else, not itself. But if I say the stone is falling, it's the stone itself that is falling. It's not changing anything else, it's just falling itself. Okay, is it clear? Well, the notion of agentivity that we have, because what I didn't tell you about, we talked about the semantic structure and the semantic grid of a verb, and we made a list of the possible semantic roles, semantic functions that a verb can have. What I didn't tell you is that what I gave you as agent, patient, theme are very, very coarse notions. They have to be refined. Maybe I quoted the course that we have on semantic structure and on valency. It's in Italian though. So those of you who don't understand Italian can take it. It's on the Moodle. Okay, so it's a course online that is a series of talks, of conferences of different people about semantic structure and valency of the verbs. Okay, so if you want to know more. So what we have seen up to now are just so-called macro thematic roles, agent, patient. There are more refined notions, depending also on the class of the verbs. Okay? So now our definition of agent contains one specification more, namely the agent is the person or the thing that has an effect on the outer world. And then everything comes in the right order. Then there are so-called as unaccusativity tests. Those of you who had it already with Emanuela Sanfelici can just recap it. For all the others, it's new stuff.
Yeah, except for the two Tsuchiya. So yesterday we did the auxiliary selection and post-verbal subjects, and I explained why that is so structured. So
Okay, great. So you have post-verbal subjects. I'm going just to mention that in passing, and then I will go on. I really hope that you're all following Nicola's lessons, because otherwise you're going to miss bits and pieces of the whole, okay? And also in terms of making exercises and these trees, they are not easy to grow. Right? Okay, so the work that Antonella Sorace has done here, I just quote Sorace 2000, but she has a whole industry of papers following. This was only the first paper that she wrote, and the reason why I quoted it is that she wrote it here when she was visiting here in Padua, at the Palazzo Marghera when we were. I was a young researcher at the time when she came, but probably still a PhD. Okay, so she shows that there are at least two semantic factors that favors the classification of verbs as unaccusative verbs. One, they have already been talking about, is the lack of agentivity of the subject. So the subject of an unaccusative verb is not a real agent, and in this sense they are similar to passives, because the element that ends up in the position of the subject is not a real agent. And the other is telicity. And now I need to ask you, do you know what telicity is? Has anybody done Greek? Yes.
I've done a thesis in telicity. It's like for the telicity we intend predicate verbs.
Telicity is a verbal notion, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, what does it mean?
It
If I
means
say that the verb is telic, or if I say that the verb is atelic, so non-telic,
it's an actual notion, so it is related with aspect.
exactly, it's an spectral notion. Okay? Verb, aspect, so we are narrowing down, and it means,
For example, if I say I ate an apple, it expresses a telic predicate. If I say I ate apples,
it's not.
it's a telic.
Okay, so, your colleague gave us a very good example. I don't know why in all the examples of grammars there is apple, there is the apple. It must be something that has to do with the original thing or something. But it's exactly the type of distinction. So try to reason on, I ate an apple or I eat apples. What's the distinction between the two? If you want to, exactly. One is concluded. So one is has a natural endpoint. What is the natural endpoint? The natural endpoint is that you finish the apple. There is no more apple. But if you say I eat apples, you could eat all the apples there are and still not be done. So there is no natural ending point. Okay? So it's the same distinction if you say I sing a song, and if I say I sing songs. If I say I sing a song, at some point the song is over. But if I say I sing songs, I could keep on, singing all the time under the shower and not be done yet. Okay? So telicity means a verb has a natural ending point. And given the example that your colleague gave you, it's also interesting to see that the same verb can be telic or not, depending on the type of object that it has. So if I have a defined object like one single apple, then also the verb becomes telic. It has an endpoint. But if I have an object that is in principle not defined, like I eat apples, then also the verb doesn't get its natural endpoint. Okay? So generally, verbs that are more commonly unaccusative are verbs that lack a real agentivity of the verb, and they are telic. What does it mean? It means that there is an actual endpoint. I'll give you an example. If I say, I arrived home at 3. You see, a verb like arrive has an actual endpoint. When? When you arrive. So when you're home, it's finished. The action is finished. Okay? If I say, I go to Rome tomorrow, you go to Rome, and then when you're in Rome, the action of going is finished. You see, so change of location verbs are the most telic verbs there are because they have the endpoint, which is the locative. Do you remember when we talked about the locatives and I said, locatives are a difficult class because sometimes they are agents and sometimes they are arguments. These are the type of verbs, so change of location verbs, are the type of verbs that always take a location as an argument because it defines the endpoint. Now you know why. Because the location needs to define the endpoint of the action of the verb. So to roll is necessary with the verb like go because it has to stop the movement, it has to define where the movement stops. Okay, it's intrinsic from the lexical semantics of the verb. Okay? So a verb like arrive always has an endpoint. Even if you don't express it, even if you say I arrived at 3, you might mean at home if you're talking to your husband, or you might mean at university if you're talking to a colleague, or you might mean, I don't know, at the conference in Beijing when you're talking to somebody else. Okay? Is it clear?
Yes.
Great. So we have now discovered what the two basic semantic properties of an accusative verbs are: lack of agentivity and telicity. Now, these semantic properties have syntactic effects. And now we are going to discover what they are. The first as we said, is the fact that this class of verbs takes another auxiliary in a lot of languages. Not in all of the languages, but in some it does. So these languages somehow reflect in their auxiliary selection a semantic distinction. Namely the distinction, so they want to signal syntactically the class of verbs that lacks a real genitive subject and then is T. Okay? Now, if I say, John has run for 3 hours, and if I say, John has run home, in a language like Italian, there are 2 different auxiliaries. Why? Can you tell me why? So John has run for 3 hours now, or John has run home.
Because one is the
Exactly, because the second one is stylic, the first one is not. If you say, I have been running for 3 hours, I could keep on and go on running like mad for, until I'm dead. But if you say, I ran home, once you're home, you stop running because you're home. You see? So even the same verb can be considered as an accusative or not because it's either telic or non-telic. Yes.
But doesn't the 3 hours describe the ending point? Like, the moment the 3 hours pass, you stop running.
But then John ran for 3 hours. No, because with 4, what you're indicating is just the stretch of time. You would have to use a different adverb. Right? So you would have to use an adverb, let me think. John ran until 4 o'clock. Then you have an actual endpoint, you see?
Okay.
You can do it with an adverb. You're right, you're perfectly right. This is just not the right adverb. I took another adverb just to signal the stretch of time. Yes?
Isn't the translation John ran for 3 hours, the past, so it's over?
Uh-huh. Well, in Italian, at least in Northern Italian, there is no distinction between the two. We just use has run for both.
I always thought it didn't exist as run, and a corso is the past simple.
Well, this is just the glosses, not the translation, right?
Okay.
I was just, since I cannot do it with English, I have to do it with Italian. And I just wanted to see, because if I write John ran, you don't see the difference between have and be.
But if John ran, then it's finished. There would be
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, what your colleague is saying is that English has a different way to express eliciting, to express that the action is over, namely the simple past with respect to the present perfect. Right? At least in Northern Italian, there is no distinction. So we say Gianni è corso, Gianni ha corso. I bet nobody of you uses Gianni corse. Right? Yes.
Could you say John has run for 3 hours and now he's getting tired and the running is finished?
Yeah.
And
But
that
then
would be
that's because you're adding something.
okay.
Right? Just like, what your colleague was saying, that instead of saying for 3 hours, you change and say until 4, and that's it gives you an endpoint. Yes, you can give endpoints with all sorts of elements, right? But the point is that, there is a distinction, and some verbs are not either telic or non-telic. The verb in itself is an activity verb, okay? But then modifying the rest of the elements, either the locative or the temporal element, you can just insert a natural endpoint. At this point, the verb becomes telic, and at this point, the auxiliary changes. Okay? Is it clear? So you have to translate it into Italian. Gianni ha corso
Wait, you have to mention what?
Fino alle 3.
Ran in 3 hours?
fino alle 3. It's the same thing, Depending on the type of adverb, you either have a telic point or not. Yeah, in this case it has an endpoint. So you would say è corso, right? Yeah. So the reason why I took this verb is that I wanted to show you that some verbs are just activity verbs and you have different ways to insert an endpoint. You know, you can use, as your colleague was saying, if you take a transitive verb, even a transitive verb can be telic or non-telic. If you just, modify the object, the type of object it has, remember the example, an apple versus apples, right? Or in the case of activity verbs, you can insert locative items, you can insert the temporal items, so there are all sorts of things that can make your verb telic. Yes?
Yes, for example, in English you have also telicity markers, like burn. You can say the forest has burned for days, but you have also the forest is burn out, burn up, and so on.
Exactly. English has so-called phrasal verbs, and phrasal verbs very often, so the preposition that goes with the verb is very often an aspectual marker. Sometimes even an aspectual marker of telicity. The same happens to be true in Veneto. I'll give you an example in Veneto, I say gamagna fora tutti sky. Fora, so meaning out, is the telicity marker, right? So the northern Italian dialects are famous because they are, with respect to all the other Romance languages, they have this phenomenon of phrasal verbs, right? I once had a university professor who was teaching German literature, and he was not from northern Italy, and he said, "You don't even know how to talk in Italian because you use all these prepositions." And he was forgetting that German has exactly the same phenomenon. That's because he was not a linguist. But you see, so what I want you to convey to you is that telicity is an aspectual distinction that gives you a natural endpoint, and verbs can have different elements they can, be put together with that can mark telicity, like the temporal adverbs, the locatives, or in the case of transitives, the type of object. Okay? Now, generally, unaccusative verbs are verbs that are intrinsically telic. Okay, so they are not activity verbs that are atelic. They just have their natural endpoint in their own lexical semantics. Okay? So you have discovered now two things, and we have not been given syntax now. We have been doing semantics up to now, at least, descriptive semantics. So all verbs can be turned into telic verbs provided the right environment is given. And unaccusative verbs are verbs that are intrinsically telic in the sense that they have an endpoint. Okay? So the properties of unaccusative verbs are two. So they lack a real adjunctive subject and they are telic. Okay? And now one thing that has never been discussed that I don't know is whether unaccusative verbs just need one of the two to be unacusatives, or if they need both. Right? For instance, Laura Vanelli in her small Nuova Grammatica dell'Italiano says that you need both. I'm not so sure that you need both. Because evidently it depends on the type of notion you have for an agent. You see? So if you are manipulating the notion of agent, then it might come out one way or the other. You see? Okay, so we have now discovered that there is a class of verbs that are intrinsically telic, and they can have a subject that is not an agent, and in this sense they are similar to passives. Now let's go through the various tests of unaccusativity. I don't know how to take this away, but so the title of this slide should be Absolute Participles. I'm giving you the examples for Italian because it's the language most of you speak. I could give you other tests for other languages. For instance, in German, there are tests of unaccusativity, but since there is no clitic, no need as we had it, that test is irrelevant. But some of the tests are the same, some are different. So for each language that has the phenomenon of unaccusativity, namely that splits the class of intransitive verbs into two classes with different auxiliaries, like be and have, right? In all these languages, there are tests that identify unaccusative verbs as a unitary homogeneous class, but the tests differ depending on the language. Now we're going to do those for Italian. I could do them more or less for French, they are more or less the same. For French, in German there are some that don't work, but there are some others that Italian and French don't have. Okay? Anyway, the defining property is always that these verbs take the auxiliary P. So in a language, if there is a class that takes another auxiliary and is generally B, then it's always the class of atypic verbs that don't have an agenic subject. Okay? Okay, so as I said, I'm going to give you the examples for Italian, so the tests for Italian. And we can just go step by step also for those of you who don't understand Italian so that everybody comes with me, okay? So for those of you who don't understand Italian, please stop me if something is unclear, because I cannot know how much you know. Okay, so first test, so-called absolute past participles. So Italian, just like Latin, has a possibility to just use the past participle with a direct object, and that's called an absolute past participle because there is no auxiliary. Okay? So if you say something like fatta la legge trovato l'inganno, it would mean something like once the law has been done, has been created, you can find a deception for it. You can find a way out. That's a very typical Italian sentence, right? It's almost the same, fixed expression. Okay, if you look at this, what you see is that here there is a past participle, fatta, and here there is another past participle, trovato. So there is no inflection whatsoever around. That's why they are called absolute past participles, because they are just past participial clauses. Not all languages have it. For instance, French has it only if you put it together with une fois, meaning once. Once the law has been done. You see, once done, they say once the law done. Okay? So, what is the interesting property of this absolute past participle? Why am I talking about those? Well, I'm talking about those because generally the only element that can be put together with the absolute past participle is the direct object. Look here, fatta la legge, the law is the patient. Trovato l'inganno, found the deception, inganno, so deception is the patient. Okay? For all transitive verbs, the absolute past participle only takes the patient, never the agent. So you cannot say something like, Mary down the law. Maria fatta la legge, doesn't work. Il governo fatta la legge, doesn't work. You cannot say fatto il governo la legge. So done the government the law. It doesn't work. So in absolute past participle, the only thing that you need to have inside is the patient, not the agent. Now, guess what? So I even have an example, maybe it's worth using it. Dato un libro a Giorgio, so given a book to Giorgio, Mary left. Okay, so once she has given the book to Giorgio, so you can see that verb like here, which is a ditransitive verb with 3 arguments. You can have the direct object, it can have the indirect object, but you cannot have the subject. The subject is sitting in the main clause, but you cannot say Maria dato un libro a Giorgio. That's out. You see? So the agent can never stay inside an absolute past participle. Now, can you tell me what happens? So in absolute constructions, it's possible to express internal arguments, so the direct object and the indirect object. but not external ones, so not the agent. You remember that we talked about the agent, and we said that the agent is very often called the external argument because it's higher in the structure. So external argument corresponds to agent. Okay, it's another way to say it. Okay, so what is our hypothesis for unaccusative verbs? Unaccusative verbs don't have agentive subjects. They have subjects that look like patients or themes. So what is our hypothesis? You can think about it while you drink.
that the constituent moved from the object to the subject.
Yeah, they can move from the object to the
To
subject
the
position.
fine.
That's the analysis of unaccusative verbs.
Yeah.
But for absolute past participle, what does this story predict? So, exactly. That unaccusative subjects can be inserted into the absolute past participle construction. Why? Because they are not agents. Here are the examples. Morto un papa, fatto un altro. Dead one pope, done another. That's, once a pope is dead, you make another. So that's what it means. But you see that here there is just the past participle, and then there is the subject of the verb to die. But I just said, agents are not possible inside an absolute past participle, but here, this is not an agent. Actually, the Pope most probably didn't want to die, just happened. So he was no agent. Is it clear? So, whenever you see, so how does the test work? The test works as follows. Once you put the subject in an absolute construction, in an absolute past participle construction, this means that the verb that you have is an unaccusative verb. Okay? So arrivata Maria, arrived Mary, that's perfectly fine. Mary is the subject of arrive, it's not the object. Arrivata Maria a Padova, so you can even add the locative, but you could never add an agent. I just showed you in the previous slide that you cannot add an agent, okay? And why can you have the subject of such a verb? Well, it's easy, because this is not a real agent, so you're not violating the condition that I gave you earlier, right? Just, that these are not real agents. Or something like Partita Maria, so left, once Mary left, or better, left Mary. Okay, you see, so absolute past participle constructions can never take real agents inside their construction. Why can you take the subject of an accusative verb inside the structures? Answer, this shows you precisely what I told you, namely that the subject of an accusative verb is not an agent. All the slides are already, so this version of the slides that I'm using is already on the Moodle, okay? I just told you not to download it because these things were missing and I want to insert it. But if you want, you can already use this, at least this part, because I'm not going to change it. Okay, so subjects of passive sentences and of an accusative verbs can be realized in the absolute construction because they are not the external argument, they are not the agent. Is it clear? Any questions on this? No, this is the first test. Yes?
I think in the hierarchy of the verbs, unaccusative verbs, the degree of agentiveness change. So does that degree also matter here?
Oh, definitely.
More or less agentive.
Definitely. The point is that, that's a good point. Okay, I told you, this is the universal hierarchy. And depending on where you cut, then you can use the absolute past participle. Italian cuts relatively low, it cuts up to here. So all these verbs in Italian are supposed to occur in the absolute construction. If French cuts here, French has the absolute construction. You have une fois and you have to put the element in verbal, but if you adjust it, it exists at least, right? And then French cut here, because in French, even the verb be corresponding to be takes half. So, you know, while in Italian you say, I am been, French says I have been, just like English does. J'ai été, not je suis été. That's one of the typical mistakes I always make because I think of Italian, right? Yes.
But we said that construction, absolute construction allow only the patient, not the agent.
Yeah.
And we said that it's because the agent is an external argument, and it's an argument that is generated on spec PP. Right. But spec PP with the B little, because if we say spec PP big, we have the, for example, the Daphne, the Mary, etc. And in Italian we have the example where it's allowed to say caso di da Giorgio hierarchy. So it's only when the argument is generated in spec PP little, right?
Little b. Yes. Yes. So you are already going one step further. I was not giving you the analysis yet. So you are already presenting the analysis, namely, there is a lot of literature that says the following. Verbs that, let me just draw it again because it has become a mess here. Okay. So suppose this is the internal structure of the bitransitive verb, as we said. And we said that since we want to keep UTA, namely unitary semantic role assignment, this is the place for the patient. This is the place for the recipient. And this is the place for the agent. And it's always like that. And if you see them in a different order, the reason for this is that you have moved something around. Okay? So that was the hypothesis that we made. The other hypothesis was that you can switch these two around, then you lose the uniformity of semantic role assignment, and then you would have to say something else in order to recognize that something is really a patient and something is really okay? You remember what the problem was. Okay. So now, if we say a normal transitive verb has this position occupied and this position occupied. So the absolute of participle comes here, right? Because you cannot have the agent, but you can have both the patient and the recipient, just like in given a book to Mary, right? So what you are doing here, you are just eliminating the external shell of the view. You remember that I told you that this hypothesis is called VP shells since Larson 88? Okay. So you're eliminating the external shell. And actually, this is one possible analysis of unaccusative verbs. So a lot of people say that unaccusative verbs are made in this way. So they don't have the small v. They don't project it. There is nothing. This is the analysis that I think Emanuela Sanfelice provided you with, and it comes from, if I'm not mistaken, the first time that it was proposed, it was in 2003 by Hagit Vorer. Don't ask me the exact title of the paper, but if you just Google it, Hagit Vorer 2003 VP and accusatives, it comes out. Okay, so this was, I think, the first time that it was proposed. Usually, I always told you, every analysis comes with a cost. This analysis costs in terms of phases, which is a something that I've not introduced yet, the notion of phase. I'm going to, I was not thinking of presenting it so early in the course, but now that it has come up, I can tell you briefly what it is, and then we can go on and move on, and I will talk about it a bit more diffusely when we reach the point when phases become relevant. You remember that we talked about movement, and we said, how does movement occur? Well, there is something that lacks some features. So we are always talking about feature-driven movement, because some feature is lacking, like the T projection is lacking for some number, and then it sends a probe downstairs, finds a goal, copies the features, and in some languages it drags along the whole DP to its specifier, so that subjects are always in front of the auxiliary verb in English, because they have been moved from their original position, right? Now, it has been noticed that in some cases movement is blocked, and so there has been, the hypothesis. This comes from originally a paper by Chomsky, Noam Chomsky. 2001, which is unsurprisingly called On Phases. And that's the first time when this idea was proposed. He has the following idea that when we build up syntax, our buffer memory is limited, okay? So we start working it out, and we reach a certain point where our buffer is full, and it doesn't work any longer. So what do? We take the stuff that we have created, we move it up. I have to open the door because I'll oxygen. I hope nobody else catches a cold or worse, COVID or something like that. But that's so that you have some oxygen to breathe. Okay, so suppose that your buffer is full, you have created a syntactic object, but you cannot create anything longer because your memory is full. What do? You take the syntactic object that you have created, and you throw it out to phonology. And you say, look, you have to express it because I can't take any longer. I can't take anything more, so just, you chuck it out to phonology, and phonology does the work of phonology does, It inserts different elements, it makes a simulation, it makes cancellation processes, insertion processes, and then in the end, it provides the instructions to the muscles of our vocal cords, and then, we pronounce it. At this point, syntax is empty again, and you can restart. And you can start working on again. So, generally, people say that this thing, so the small VP is a phase. So once you have completed the VP, you throw it out. And you start working on the, okay, so this is a phase. Now, saying that unaccusative verbs don't have the small VP implies that they are not phases. That they are not complete. So a phase, the intuition behind this story is that a phase is somehow a complete domain, syntactically. So what could another phase be if we define a phase as a complete domain? Because this domain is complete from the point of view of the thematic role assignments. There are no other thematic roles you can have. You have already had everything. Okay? So what could be another phase? One possibility. A complete domain. The answer is very easy. Nobody has an idea? Applause. A whole sentence is a phase, right? Because it's completed. If I say John went to the cinema, it's completed. So there are two types of phrases. The small VP, because it's completed in a thematic sense. So you cannot add anything any longer. So all the thematic roles have been assigned. There is nothing more that you can provide. from the point of view of the most minimal event. And then the other phase is the whole clause, so the whole CP that we have not seen yet. Okay, because we have not reached the left periphery yet in our work here. Okay? So, if we take Borel's analysis, the one that Emanuele Sanfelici has provided you with in the course of Linguistica per Condimento, then you would have to say that unaccusative verbs are not phases, are not real phases. I don't know whether that's a good move. Remember, everything comes at a cost. Because you would expect a lot of more, how could I say, movements in the case of unaccusatives that you actually don't find. That's a problem. But anyway, let's come back to, we were talking about the test, so this was just to answer your question, right? So remember that when you're asking me a question, this could take us very far from me to answer.
I'm not sure if I should ask it because I have a question on phases.
Just ask it out and we'll see.
So does Chomsky mean that when we think about the clause, we only speak it when clause completed syntactically?
Exactly.
But sometimes I start to talk without knowing where I'm going.
This is a very good point. Actually, what you were saying is that, Chomsky is going from a bottom-up structure, right? So you're building up the structure from the VP. But actually, when you start talking, you don't talk. You don't say the patient, the verb, the recipient, and then the subject. You just go the other way around. You start from the top, and then and this is precisely the reason why I don't think that phases are, there is this problem. There is this problem that if you go bottom up, then, and you apply the notion of phases, then the phase, you must have built the first phase, which is the last thing you say. See what I mean? So there is an approach in these terms. It has been proposed by what's his name again? One of our colleagues at the University of Pavia, Cristiano Chesi. That's his name. Chesi. And he thinks that actually syntax should go top down and not bottom up. This is actually a computational problem that you're not going to deal with because I'm not even prepared to do that because I'm a syntactician, I'm not a computational linguist. But computational linguists tell me that it's very difficult to have it top down, but Casey has a proposal on this. So I think this would be a nice topic for, master thesis with my colleague in computational linguistics, not necessarily only with me. Okay? Let's go back. We are talking about the tests for unaccusativity. Okay? We have said, first test, auxiliary selection. That's the definition. Second test, absolute past participle. Okay. Yes.
But this test of absolute participle, can explain why in Latin I cannot make the verb posterior with all verbs. So for example, a verb like admirar, I can say duce admirar. Not sure I can use
Well, this has never been tried out. So I cannot provide you an answer because it's not in the literature. One would have really to look at all the class of verbs that don't do it, all the class of verbs that do it, and then see what happens. Yeah. It's another nice topic for this. This one with me, not necessarily with computational linguistics. Okay, so is it clear what this test says? This test tells you that the subject of an accusative verb functions like the patient of a transitive verb. Okay? And all the other cases that we are going to look at are cases of this type. I see that people are have 10 minutes, right? It's not to go to another class. Okay, now, negligization. This is the most difficult test. So, but again, it runs exactly in the same direction as the one with absolute transformation. So what I'm going to show you, this is a spoiler, okay? What I'm going to show you is that with respect to negligization, the subject of an accusative verb behaves like the object of a transitive verb. Okay, so that they are really patients and not agents. Should I repeat this? Yeah. Okay, so again, the same story goes as for absolute postparticiples. For absolute postparticiples, we said that you can have the subject of an accusative verb because this subject of an accusative verb corresponds to the patient, right? And not to the agent, because the agent you cannot have in absolute past participle. The same story happens here. Negligization can be done with the patient, but not with the agent. So you can do it with the object of a transitive verb. You cannot do it, and you can do it with the subject of an accusative verb, but not with the subject of a transitive. Okay, so the subject of a transitive and the object is excluded. The subject of the accusative aligns with the object of a transitive. Okay, so subject of an accusative, object of a transitive are the same. The subject of the transitive goes away. Is it clear? Okay, so let's now go. First of all, what is cliticization? We need to define that. What are clitics? Clitics are a Romance specialty. They are very short pronouns that don't have word accent. I could, give an entire course on clitics, so you need to stop it here. So clitics don't have word accent, so they cannot be used in isolation. So if you say in Italian, who did you see? And the answer is him. You have to say lui, you cannot say lo. Chi hai visto? Lo. That just doesn't work. You need to use another form. Okay? Clitics always go together with the verb. They are either just before the verb or just after the verb. So in proclisis or enclisis. I've had a couple of students who did their master thesis on me on the evolution of clitics, on the topic of Musafia law, and on the evolution of the position of clitics, and it came out very interesting stuff. Leaving it aside. Further properties of clitics is that they cannot be modified, they cannot be coordinated, and they cannot be pushed around in the sentences, so they need to be close to the verb. Okay? Italian has direct object clitics, lo, la. Indirect object clitics, gli, le. It has a reflexive, si, clitics. It has a locative clitic, which is chi. And it has a genitive clitic, which is ne. And that's what we're talking about. Not all the Romance languages have the same class of clitics. For instance, Spanish and Portuguese don't have the locative and don't have the genitive. French even has subject clitics, so one step more. Okay? So French is the language that has the most fullest class of clitics. Okay? The biggest one. Italian is in between, and then Spanish and Portuguese lost the locative and the genitive a long time ago. They had it, but it has been lost. Okay, what does ne represent? It represents of this. So it's a genitive, if you want. And this is actually now I'm talking to the future teachers. This is a real disaster for Germanic speakers who don't have it, because you just leave this position empty. And I could tear my hair off because my German students never use it. Right? They just, they say, ne ho due, they say ho due. There is something missing there. You see? Ne ho bisogno, they say just ho bisogno. Ho bisogno di che? I need, I need the name there. Okay, so it's representing partitive, or if you want a genitive, okay? Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think English has ne either because learning Italian is the hardest thing. I don't think I even, like I speak Italian, I don't think I can master ne because it just doesn't
see?
exist, so I don't know how to apply it.
Yeah, exactly. So now you're going to learn not everything, but something about name, okay? Also because this thing is obligatory. It's the same in French. I mean, if you speak French, you will make the same mistakes because French is almost identical to, it even uses it more than Italian, so you're probably make even more mistakes when you're speaking French. So ne is a sort of partitive, because if you say, I ate 3 slices of cake, you know, you can say, I ne ate 3, and this of them corresponds to ne. So ne is resuming, is a pronoun. It is resuming 3 slices, is resuming slices of cake. And you leave just the 3 there. So the Germanic languages don't have any pronoun that does it. It's not entirely true. The only Germanic language I know of that has it is Cimbrian. I don't know where you know what Cimbrian is. Cimbrian is a minority language. It's a linguistic island spoken up here in the north of Veneto and in the southern Trentino. And it's a Germanic language that, you know, has been living in contact with Romance for about 1,000 years, and they have developed a clinic of the ne type. But for the rest of the Germanic languages don't have it, and as far as I know, they never had it. Not even in the past. Okay, so it's really a problem there. Now, what do we do in Italian? So once again, we have this ne, and this ne is a pronoun that is resuming the genitive object of a quantifier. What is a quantifier? Do you know what a quantifier is? If I say the name quantifier, what do I mean by that? Do you know what it means? Just give me an example of a quantifier. Yeah, okay, and then? So many, a lot, a few, none, 33, so all the numbers are quantifiers, but also those that say all, so the universal quantifier, the negative quantifier, none, and also all those quantifiers that are not really, how could I say, very precise. If you say a lot, I say I had a lot of students in the syntax course today. This means I had more or less a 70. If I would be talking about the introductory course, 70 would be very few students, because generally I had 200 there. You know, this type of quantifiers can change depending on the environment they're in. But now you know what a quantifier is, okay? So the quantifier takes a complement in general, 3 slices of cake. Now you can resume slices of cake with ne. Ne is a clidic, and all the conditions I gave you for clidics apply. So ne is found just in front, it means of it, and it's, found just in front of the inflected verb, as all clidics usually are found, okay? Now, why am I've been talking for 10 minutes about ne, and now it's 12 and I cannot tell you anything any longer? Because necliticization works just like absolute postparticiples. So you can criticize with ne the object, so the part of the object of a transitive verb, so part of the patient. So I have eaten 3 slices of cake, and then it's I ne have eaten 3, and ne means slices of cake. Okay? And it's obligatory. How many students do you have in the course? I have 40. I have 70. And then 70 of students. You have to resume this of students with ne. So it's obligatory in Italian to have it. So if you say, oh, una quarantina, that's strongly grammatical. You're making a mistake. Now, so the subject of a transitive verb or of a real intransitive verb cannot be resumed by ne. So if you say something like, of linguists, 3 have talked, you cannot say ne hanno parlato 3. That's out. Of workers at the building site, ne hanno lavorato 3. have word 3 that doesn't work with me, okay? So, you can resume it when the element that you're resuming is the patient. You cannot do it when you are resuming the agent. So what is our hypothesis for an accusative verbs? The same that we did for that you can, right? Because an accusative subject work like transitive objects. And actually, I finish our lesson, it's 12 o'clock. Here are the examples. Of them have arrived many. Sono arrivati molti progetti. Okay? We are going to start from here tomorrow. I recap the whole task, etc. today. I'm not going to do that tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm just going straight to an example. So if there is anything you have not understood about passives, just come tomorrow and raise your questions at the beginning of the session.